Africa remains home to 55% of the world's population living below the poverty line. Number 2, our region has also witnessed an increase in the prevalence of chronic hunger in the region from 15.1% in 2010 to 19.7% in 2020. Number 3, at the same time, climate change poses an existential threat to the region, yet African countries struggle when it comes to financing climate action. Estimates are that Africa needs 2.8 trillion United States dollars to implement its nationally determined contributions to climate action. Number 4, additionally, more than 1.43 billion people either resides in or share land borders with conflict-affected countries, making them vulnerable to spillover effects. This undermines stability of institutions. Number 5, moreover, corruption and bribery pose significant development challenges in the region. They further undermine institutions, entrench poverty, contribute to increased inequality, and adversely affect the fair distribution of resources and development opportunities. These statistics, Your Excellencies, are an explicit call to urgent action on fundamental challenges, which, if not attended to, can strangle progress to inclusive sustainable development at multiple levels. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me at this juncture to highlight some of the efforts of the government of Namibia in tackling poverty and building a foundation for shared prosperity and resilience. As you will hear in our VNR presentation to the main session of the HLPF on Wednesday, Namibia has, among others interventions, increased investments in diverse energy resources, including green hydrogen and oil and gas. The country was able to attract around $1.8 billion in investments between 2021 and 2023, which is expected to create up to 15,000 jobs. The government of Namibia has prioritized investments in the social sector to enhance long-term economic productivity and uplifting the standard of living. For the financial year 2024-2025, the government of the Republic of Namibia has allocated 50.7% of its budget to the social sector. This will enhance the social safety nets, such as old age and disability grants. Moreover, proactive initiatives such as the establishment of the basic income grant and a drought relief program have provided support to thousands of Namibians. Ladies and gentlemen, more needs to be done with speed and at the scale of all African countries to enjoy prosperity and build resilient societies. This demands more ambitious development efforts. The adoption of the second 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063 early this year is timely and brings hope for our region. Under this plan, African heads of states and governments have set an ambitious target for all African countries to reach middle income status in the next decade. As envisioned in this implementation plan, to realize this goal, African countries need to adopt transformative policies and plans, and increased investment aims at the following. 1, enhancing the standard of living, quality of life, and well-being of all citizens. 2, transforming economic and create jobs. 3, modernizing agriculture. 4, accelerating the growth of the blue or ocean economy. And 5, building climate resilience of economies and communities. At the 10th session of the African Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, African countries have clearly articulated their priorities to realizing inclusive and sustainable development, capitalizing on both 2020-30 Agenda and Agenda 2063. Allow me now, Your Excellencies, to point out some of these priorities and key messages that have a strong bearing on the theme of this Africa Day event. Number 1, concrete actions are needed to capitalize on and reap a demographic demographic dividend from the youth bulge of Africa. Key to realizing this is to dramatically increase investments and expand programs and services in education, nutrition, and health to empower all children and young people with a clear focus on gender balance. Number 2, substantial budgets should be allocated to poverty reduction and to address gender inequalities and the poverty climate nexus with special attention to women and the youth. Number 3, we need to transform policies to create a conducive, business-friendly environment to uphold the right to food, enhance resilience to climate shocks, leverage technology, and foster partnership for sustainable agriculture. African countries, number 4, African countries and their partners need to strengthen means of conflict prevention, peace building, respect for international law, and human rights, in particular, the right to development. This translates to the urgent need to double down on efforts in Africa to ensure peace, recognizing that it is a prerequisite for security, human dignity and rights, good governance, and inclusive sustainable development. And the last one, all these should be accompanied with effective efforts to mobilize and channel adequate funding to drive local action with tangible results on the lives of the people. In this connection, it is crucial to foster innovation in sustainable finance and pursue just transitions. Scaling up investments in early warning systems and climate literacy is key to enhancing resilience. Clearly, the scope of interventions needed is wide and deep, and therefore concerted actions and partnerships are indispensable. Your deliberations today should enhance to drill down on concrete actions and the types and scales of partnerships, as well as accountability mechanisms needed for impact that we desire. Taking this approach, Your Excellencies, this event will go a long way in translating the outcomes of our regional forum into meaningful actions on the ground. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the Honorable Minister for her remarks. I now have the honor to invite His Excellency Professor Mutuli Nkumbe, who is the Minister of Finance and Economic Development of the Republic of Zimbabwe, and also the Chair of the Conference of African Ministers of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Honorable Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a good afternoon, a late afternoon indeed. It gives me immense pleasure to be here to deliver a keynote address at this pivotal event, and we gather here today amidst a global landscape that poses significant challenges for many nations, particularly those from Africa. The current global financial architecture faces significant challenges in addressing the financial needs for climate action, sustainable development, and debt management. The calls for reforms are growing louder, seeking to create a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable financial system. Increasing the representation of African countries in global economic decision-making processes is crucial for the continent's development and prosperity. Climate change is one of the more pressing issues of our time, and with far-reaching consequences for our planet and its inhabitants. It is essential to acknowledge the urgency and significance of climate change and to take collective action to address its causes and mitigation effects. Mitigating its effects, rather. Addressing climate action requires a multifaceted approach that involves individuals, communities, organizations, governments working together to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate the impacts of climate change. Carbon credits are a key component of international efforts to deal with greenhouse gas emissions effect and to combat climate change. By leveraging carbon credits, countries can unlock benefits that support their sustainable development, economic growth, climate resilience, while contributing to global efforts to combat climate change in general. Colleagues, we seek to build a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient Africa through renewed partnerships and strong institutions. However, a troubling trend has emerged where governments worldwide are grappling with mounting public debt, limiting their ability to invest in core social services that their citizens so desperately need. The African continent has not been spared from these shocks. Our government's balance sheets have been severely weakened, leaving them operating under considerable fiscal constraints. The average public debt in Africa ratio is around 65% of GDP, with some countries having higher debt levels. Alarmingly, nearly 40% of African countries are in or at high risk of debt distress. To make matters worse, 60% of African nations now spend more on servicing their external debt than on health care. The existing global debt architecture is ill-equipped to address the pressing needs of African countries. We call for urgent reforms to the G20 common framework to make it more effective, efficient, transparent, and fit for purpose. Furthermore, we demand the suspension of debt service for all countries entering the common framework restructurings and a comprehensive review of the IMF World Bank debt sustainability analysis framework to prioritize and balance the needs for solvency and mere liquidity. By working together, we can promote economic stability, reduce debt vulnerabilities, and create a brighter economic future for Africa. Colleagues, the path ahead is not without its challenges. Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 will require an estimated $1.3 trillion per year, while costs of addressing climate change alone are projected to reach $2.8 trillion through 2030 on the African continent. Sadly, even as these financing needs grow, official development assistance to Africa declined by 3.5% in 2022. While borrowing costs have soared in tighter global monetary environment and private capital remained sidelined. I cannot help to add, when we received the SDG resources in Zimbabwe, and this cuts across all the African countries that received SDR resources to support the need to respond to the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. The interest rate back then was 0.45%, 0.5%. Today, the interest rate on those SDRs is 4.5%. So we've had a sharp increase on the cost of servicing resources that we all thought were concessionary, but it turns out that they're actually commercial. Poverty is a complex issue, colleagues, that affects millions of people worldwide in Africa, perpetuating inequality, hunger, poor health, and limited access to education and opportunities. Africa has made, I must say, significant progress in recent years in terms of financing its own development through domestic resources. This funding, however, is inadequate to close the widening financing gap as countries recover from COVID-19. According to the AFDB, the African Development Bank, the COVID-19 pandemic indeed had a devastating impact on Africa, causing widespread economic hardship and pushing millions into extreme poverty. Africa has indeed made significant progress in recovering from the pandemic's economic impacts, with many countries experiencing economic growth and improvements in these poverty rates. To bridge the financing gap to finance development in Africa, African countries need to boost domestic resource mobilization by increasing financing resources, improving public spending efficiency, leveraging large pension fund markets and sovereign wealth fund resources, curbing illicit financial flows out of the continent, and harnessing partnerships. We must explore innovative solutions and leveraging the ongoing financing for development processes to secure adequate financial and technical resources to support Africa's participation and engagement in the tax reform process. Let us seize this opportunity to shape a better future for all. Ensuring sufficient resources from the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and multilateral development banks, MDBs, is vital for African countries to address economic challenges, including those exacerbated by geopolitical tensions. The IMF provides financial assistance, policy advice, and technical support to help our countries. In addition, the Poverty Reduction Growth Trust, the PRGT, and the Growth and Sustainability Fund, the GSF, all under the IMF, need reform to better serve Africa and developing countries. The current global economic architecture has been criticized for being unfair, inadequate, and unsustainable, particularly for developing countries. Reforms should focus on creating a more inclusive, more long-term, more concessionary, equitable and sustainable global economic system that addresses the unique challenges and needs of Africa and other developing regions. Affordable finance is indeed crucial for sustainable development, and strengthening multilateral development banks, MDBs, is essential to increase lending capacity and support development projects. By strengthening these MDBs, we can unlock more resources for sustainable development, bridge the financing gap, and achieve the SDGs. The IDA replenishment process is on, and I think it needs quite a bit of support from the partners who typically support this window for concessionary financing for the developing world. Furthermore, innovative financing tools and mechanisms can help reduce financing costs, making it easier for countries to access affordable finance for development. For example, one of the things that I did last year was to buy insurance, climate insurance, from Africa Risk Capacity Group. We paid $3 million US, and with the support of some of the partners, we only paid about half of that, actually. But lo and behold, last week we got a payout because we were hit by a climate shock. We got a payout of $32 million US. So you've leveraged, something that costs you $3 million more than 10 times, and this will cover basically half the district that have been affected heavily by a climate shock. So making use of some of these innovative tools to deal with climate shocks is really the way to go to supplant our normal budgetary outlays. Debt swaps, ladies and gentlemen, can be a valuable instrument for managing debt and alleviating financial stress. By exchanging debt for new obligations with more favorable terms, countries can manage their debt more effectively, reduce financial stress, create space for sustainable development and economic growth. Alongside debt relief, African nations are also calling for support in developing tools and instruments that can lower the crippling costs of financing. The recent UN General Assembly resolution 78/230, emphasizing the need for a UN framework convention on international tax cooperation, is a positive step in the right direction. We commend the Africa Group of negotiators for their excellent work in leading these negotiations, and we welcome the zero draft terms of reference for the this crucial initiative. Taxation plays a vital role in financing development and reducing inequality in Africa. A framework convention that reestablishes policy space for African countries to exercise sovereignty over their tax systems is essential. African countries can collectively leverage taxation as a powerful tool to achieve economic transformation, social justice, and sustainable development for the benefit of all societies. The UN Tax Framework Convention is crucial for establishing a globally fair and transparent tax system. Let us continue to emphasize the importance of this convention and work towards a more just and equitable global tax system. Let us all secure adequate financial and technical resources to support Africa's participation and engagement in the tax reform process. Only through a concerted global effort can we ensure the necessary resources to achieve our development aspirations and secure a brighter future for all. Ladies and gentlemen, the time for action is now. We must come together and united in our determination to reform the global debt architecture, the global financial architecture, and strengthen international tax cooperation and unlock the resources required to build a more prosperous and equitable Africa. Let us heed the call and forge a path that leads us to a more sustainable and inclusive future for all. I thank you. Merci beaucoup.
I thank the Honourable Minister for his remarks. And this brings us now to the end of our second session. I will now hand over the moderation to Mr. John Paul Adam, who is the Director in the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, to facilitate the next session.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Ambassador, and congratulations on a very well managed session. And I'm very pleased to join the ministers as well and proceed with the next session. And I think we have heard very clearly so far on the urgency of Africa claiming ownership of its own development, particularly through the ability to mobilize resources, the reform of the international processes, in particular the financing architecture, and the ability to also positively influence global processes, including the Summit for the Future. In this session, we will be focusing a little bit more on the state's experience in relation to their implementation of both Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063 of the African Union, for which we are now implementing the second 10-year implementation plan. In that context, we also will be inviting ministers and representatives of different African countries to share their reflections on the accelerations that are necessary. I would also like to inform everyone that we did benefit from a pre-session preceding today's event, and this was held on the 2nd of July, where we had a number of representatives who, from the various countries that have been presenting voluntary national reviews and sharing their experiences, some of the challenges that they have faced, as well as the opportunities that they would like to mobilize going forward. For this session, we will have interventions from two ministers who are with us in the room, and I'll thank the ministers to speak from their seats, followed by two permanent representatives, and after which I would also ask any additional African delegations who would wish to take the floor, please raise, in fact you may raise your flags already so that my colleagues can take notes so we can make sure to give you the chance to intervene. We will then have a response and an intervention from a representative of one of the development partners, which will be the Republic of Ireland. And we will then have some representatives from civil society and youth from VNR countries who are represented here with us. And we may also take additional questions from the floor. And I would urge everyone, because we are running very tight on time, if you do wish to speak, please raise your flag or your hand early. My colleagues will identify you so we can manage the time as best as possible. And we will start first by going to Her Excellency Ms. Kenye Bale, the Minister of Planning and Economic Development of the Republic of Sierra Leone. And we would like to congratulate you, first of all, for presenting your fourth voluntary national review this year. And Africa has led these processes around taking ownership of implementing of the Sustainable Development Goals. We would like to hear your perspectives and accumulated lessons from these rounds of reviews, and what have been your biggest opportunities and challenges, and what do you feel are the things that really need to change to allow us to accelerate? Minister, if I could ask you to speak in no more than 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually only got the questions today, so what I have here probably would have taken 1 hour, but I will try and squeeze it into 5 minutes and just give you the highlights from our lessons learned and slight background. But yes, this is our fourth VNR, and each time we increase the number of goals that we assess. Initially it was goal 1, 2, 5, 16, 17, and now we've gone up to 8. We've included goal 10 and goal 13. And also goal 5. So yes, we do have a lot of experience on the VNR, assessing the SDGs, and a lot of progress has been made. But also there are challenges, as you mentioned. And one thing that we have learned or what we've done in terms of the VNR. As we know, all of the countries, I think, in this room presented SDG accelerator roadmaps. And we presented ours last year. And what we did was actually align our medium-term national development plan to the SDG roadmap. Because sometimes you have plans going in one direction, the international and global agendas, but we made sure that our plans for the last maybe 30 years, except for some public investment programs that are shorter, have been for 5 years. The longest has been 5 years. But our current medium-term development plan is for 7 years, so that it is aligned with the Agenda 2030. So it's from 2024 to 2030. And also the plan has been aligned with the Africa We Want agenda, the AU Agenda 2063, and also the Vision 2050 of ECOWAS. And what we're looking to do now is probably do a longer term plan, so that that will be entitled the Sierra Leone We Want. So I would say that that is one of the main the opportunities that we've leveraged, and why we're able to do that is because of the political will, and because we are allowed to, we align the agenda. We have come up with 5 what we call the big 5 game changers. And along those, if you look in the plan, you'll see how these big 5 game changers are aligned to the SDGs and also the Agenda 63. And these 5 game changers are, the flagship program is Feed Salon. And that is, we've come up with that from our VNR and other assessments. So the aim is to boost agriculture, to commercialize agriculture, so that it makes a greater contribution to our GDP, and that is the engine of our transformative growth. And when I have 1 more minute, can you just indicate, and I'll see how I'll summarize. Okay. The second is human capital development. Now, human capital development was our previous development plan's flagship program. So it hasn't come to an end. We are also expanding on some of the interventions that we had made previously, and the successes and gains that we made in the Ministry of in the health sector, in the education sector, in social protection, and also in women's economic and political empowerment. I think most of you now would have heard of the GWE Act in Sierra Leone, which legislatively, we have to have a 30% quota, and therefore even the number of women in cabinet has increased to under 15% to 30%, and the same with parliament. So because of that, I think we have a better cabinet and a better parliament, because we have more women in the cabinet and the parliament. Youth as well. The youth employment scheme. We know that the youth, we're building on the demographic dividend. At the same time, it addresses peace and other issues. And I only have 1 more minute. So the other 2 areas are infrastructure and technology, and restructuring or transforming the public sector architecture. If I can get to probably... Okay, then we have 5 enablers. These enablers are diversifying the economy, addressing climate change, gender mainstreaming. So we have women's economic empowerment and gender mainstreaming, and the financing of the plan, and governance, good governance, and that addresses the issue of the peace and development nexus. But coming to the financing, maybe I'll just skip to the financing, I just say that we feel that multilateralism is important, and that is why we have aligned a lot of our agendas. But then we come to financing. The most critical challenge is financing. We both on the the international, you've spoken a lot about the international financial architecture. Something needs to be done, something needs to be changed. It's not right, and countries are not getting the best that they can. We're still in the same situation. You're talking about increasing IDA. The ADB has also increased their ADF, but there needs to be a fundamental change in that. So those discussions need to go on, but at the same time, we need to look at our domestic resource mobilization and innovative financing frameworks. I think maybe my time is up.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think that one of the first steps to ownership is precisely to frame national plans relative to needs. And I think we are all very excited by what Sierra Leone has already done, and also in particular the accelerators that you have identified. And you emphasized, amongst others, but the gender aspect, which I think is extremely important. So thank you so much, Minister, for this excellent intervention. Je voudrais rappeler à tout le monde que nous avons aussi...
I would like to remind everybody that we have simultaneous interpretation.
Nous aurons des personnes qui...
Some people will intervene in French, so don't wait last minute to take your headset.
Have some interventions in French. Please feel free to use your headsets. Our next speaker is Her Excellency Ms. Fatima Assil, the Minister Delegate to the Minister of Finance in charge of Economy and Planning from the Republic of Chad. And Her Excellency has experience in both the African Union and in a member state. Je ne sais pas si vous allez intervenir en français ou en anglais. So
I don't know if you will intervene in English or in French.
Of someone who has held leadership positions as a policymaker both at regional and national levels in Africa, what are some of the most important lessons you can share with us regarding implementing Agenda 2030 and of course the linkages with Agenda 2063, and how do we achieve this acceleration which is essential? Votre Excellence.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. The question, how do we actually achieve SDGs? And let me first of all say that both agenda, SDGs and Agenda 2063 are interconnected. In my view, we cannot achieve SDGs if we don't deal with the issue of Agenda 2063, because it's our own agenda, it's based on our own need. There is extensive consultation of Agenda 2063, and therefore it's very important that when we talk about SDGs, we talk about both agenda. That's actually something that I want to really say. The second thing that I want to say, successful implementation require a vision, require ownership, require leadership. It's also requiring us to work all together, all stakeholders, private sector, civil society, government, to really achieve something substantial. The third thing that I need to say here, we need to tailor a specific need. What I mean is all of our countries have a vision which is outlined in a national development plan, which is aligned with Agenda 2063 and 2030 agenda. For example, Chad is currently finalizing its national development plan, which is firmly grounded on the UN 2030 and also Agenda 2063. The plan is ambitious, it's inclusive, and it all encompasses all 23 provinces of Chad, which include refugees, which make up 10% of our population. So it's very important, 10% of our population. So like for example, the issue of climate change. Chad cannot address the climate change like Senegal, because they have the sea and so forth. So it needs to be really specifically tailored on that needs of the country. We also need to invest on our people. I think our biggest asset is our people. We need to invest on them. Africa is endowed with natural resources, and we need to invest on our people so that they can transform this continent. So it's very important that we deal with them and not leave them as a threat to ourselves and also to others. Now, some of the challenges, I think both ministers, I echo them because actually they're our representative, Minister of Finance and Minister also of Namibia, which is also, spoke as a chair. I echo everything that they have said. But I just want to kind of, for the sake of repetition, I think the challenges is insufficient and unpredictable resources. I think the minister spoke about it. For Chad, it's surrounded by instability within our borders. I mean, we're neighbor to Libya, to Niger, to Nigeria, Cameroon, Boko Haram, Central African Republic. So we know insecurity. So when they spoke about how do you deal with security before development or development before security, I think they're interconnected. And we actually know the issue of security. So that needs to be really addressed properly. I spoke about climate change. Climate change also requires significant investment, and we need a coordinated effort. And I think that the partner, the UN, can help us to really benefit from climate changes. We go to all COPs, they have all pledges, and really nothing specific comes. And I think that it's very important that things needs to be, people need to take responsibility on what they announce. So it's very important. The opportunity, we have technology. As I said, we have to invest on our human capital. Regional integration is very important, so we need to have strong regional institutions to help us with some of the issues. So in a nutshell, this is really what I want to say. And I also want to say that building a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient Africa requires also a high sense of responsibility on our part. We African, more unity and action-oriented toward strengthening our institution so that we can able to meet the expectation of our population. The issue of Africa speaking with one voice is very important. Sometimes we have good positions, and then on the other side, we are the one that actually weakening ourselves. And this is actually from my regional experience. It's very important that we speak with one voice. This is really how we can go as an Africa and go as, so we can be stronger and we can be achieving something very specific. So I want to thank you all, especially the minister who are representing us. Chad is agreeing, is echoing what you have saying. We see ourselves in what your statement. So thank you very much. I will stop here.
Representatives. Je voudrais d'abord inviter...
First of all, I would like to invite His Excellency Mr. Sidi Mohamed Lagdaf, the Permanent Representative of the Mauritania to the United Nations, to share with us a few highlights, challenges, opportunities, and the challenges related to attaining or the SDGs and the priorities as regards Summit of the Future. Excellency, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I would like to thank you for having organized this very important meeting. Indeed, Mauritania, since 2015, wanted to ensure that the implementation of the SDGs we have achieved quite a bit, except for certain obstacles, and this has been mostly linked to the following challenges. First of all, the lack of sufficient funding for the development as well as the implementation of the SDGs. Certain objectives have been achieved in the area of health, hygiene, electricity, infrastructure, sanitation, but we need to mobilize $2.5 billion per year, and faced by the climate change as well as natural disaster, our country is extremely vulnerable to the natural disasters, which clearly compromises the realization of the SDGs, health, sanitation, and food security. We also have an interdependency on our natural resources, and the management and the promotion of a green economy is very essential, which is why we also lack capacity building and actors for the follow-up of the SDGs. Now, what are we trying to do in the next 6 years in order to achieve the SDGs? We have the firm conviction to draw benefit from this and indeed to increase our financial resources to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs and setting up mechanisms to be efficient in this regard. Therefore, we need to have better access to innovative financing, that is to ensure liquidity to crisis, to climate change, and also debt alleviation. Even though these challenges are numerous, the possibilities and the potentialities are very present, especially through an innovative and sustainable approach. What we have done for the strategies, so in regard to the Summit of the Future, is a great opportunity to reiterate their commitment in the financing, the international fund, to have a better just by offering resources to financing for developing nations and African nations in particular. As this has already been said, it is essential that we need to proceed as rapidly as possible to reform the multilateral financial systems and banking institutions to ensure that we can all arrive at the achievement of the 2030. Now, the minister has just mentioned that 60% of the GDP is servicing debt. We are faced with heavy debt. I think that the moment that the Summit of the Future will enable to converge attention on how to address this matter so as to provide freedom to African nations and to achieve the Agenda 2030 and the 2063. I'd like to reiterate the commitment of Mauritania to defend the common interest of Africa in all the different institutions. I thank you for having given me the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Excellence, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur.
Thank you very much. We'd like to pay tribute in Mauritania for the chairmanship of the African Union, but also the Forum of Sustainable Development in Africa. Thank you again.
Now proceed to invite His Excellency Ambassador Ian Madeleine, the Permanent Representative of the Republic of Seychelles to the United Nations, to deliver some remarks highlighting some of those challenges in terms of challenges and opportunities of attaining the SDGs and Agenda 2063 and looking ahead to the Summit for the Future, but also particularly in the context of small island developing states. Ambassador, in 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, as we pass a halfway mark of the 2030 Agenda, it is imperative that we continue to foster cooperation across Africa to accelerate progress towards the Agenda 2063 and the SDGs. The crises facing our continent are many, and their impacts transcend terrestrial and maritime boundaries. Climate change conflicts and global health emergencies continue to disproportionately undermine the development of our continent. Overcoming these challenges will require us to reinforce our national capacities whilst promoting peace, good governance, and socio-economic well-being through regional integration and cooperation. To attain a more prosperous and resilient Africa, we equally need to be bold and aspiring by employing innovative solutions that sustainably harness the resources we have. The blue economy presents a great example of the possibilities. The integration of value addition in the fisheries sector has significantly enhanced national earnings in several African countries, while blue bonds have enabled some of us to access much-needed financial resources while ensuring the long-term health and sustainability of our ocean. Seychelles has been able to also pursue debt relief through implementation of a debt swap. So these are some very key possibilities that we need to take note of. As we look beyond 2030, we must secure an ambitious pact for the future that aims to bridge the gap in financial and technological access and bring about the necessary reform in the multilateral system as well as the international financial architecture. In this endeavor, the plight of countries facing special circumstances, such as SIDS, must not be ignored. In view of our intrinsic characteristics, SIDS are particularly susceptible to the climate crisis at hand and other exogenous shocks. In order to advance the Antigua and Barbuda agenda for SIDS, African SIDS must enhance their collaboration through greater coordination to promote the unique challenges plaguing our islands, be it unlocking effective climate finance or pushing for implementation of a multidimensional vulnerability index. The support and partnership of the African group in advancing these efforts will be critical if we are to ensure a more prosperous, inclusive, and resilient Africa. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency Ambassador, and for highlighting in particular the needs of African small island developing states in the context of sustainable development. I would now like to go to the representative of Minister July Molo of Zimbabwe, who unfortunately could not be with us, but who is represented by Silocious Chaturuka, the Deputy Director for SDGs and Agenda 2063 Coordination, who will share with us some highlights of the perspectives from Zimbabwe. This will be followed by an intervention from Ireland, one of our development partners, and then we will have some interventions from youth representatives.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and my sincere apologies. I have a terrible voice this afternoon. I had caught a cold. So allow me to deliver these interventions on behalf of my Honorable Minister, Minister July Moyo, the Minister of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare. And allow me also to ride on already observed protocol. Let me point out that Zimbabwe has committed itself fully to this agenda, as sustainable development is a core constitutional imperative and an overall strategic objective for the country. At the national level, the SDGs have been mainstreamed into Zimbabwe's national development planning, and we have made significant progress in a number of them. Notwithstanding the progress, Zimbabwe faces a myriad of challenges across critical sectors, spanning from financing gap, agriculture, healthcare, education, gender equality, infrastructure, energy, economy, disaster management, and environmental sustainability. These challenges have been compounded by the effects of unilateral coercive measures imposed on our country by some Western powers, and Zimbabwe continues to call for their immediate and unconditional removal. Climate change-induced disasters such as the ongoing El Nino drought in Southern Africa continue to pose a significant threat to agriculture, exacerbating food insecurity and poverty levels. This puts pressure on our limited resources and disrupts social protection programs, leaving vulnerable population at heightened risks. Inadequate disaster preparedness and environmental sustainability threaten ecosystems and public health, calling for enhanced investment in disaster management and strict enforcement of environmental laws. Effective implementation of the SDGs hinges on overcoming data collection and institutional coordination challenges alongside policy streamlining and promotion of ICT innovation and rural development for inclusive growth. Allow me to speak on the opportunities. Despite the myriad challenges facing Zimbabwe across sectors, there are significant opportunities for progress. Investing in sustainable agricultural practices not only enhances food security, but also generates employment in rural areas, while innovations in farming techniques bolster productive and resilience against climate change. Increased investment in healthcare infrastructure, including hospitals and clinics, promises better access to quality healthcare services nationwide, improving healthcare outcomes overall. Zimbabwe's abundant renewable energy resources, such as solar and hydropower, present a chance to reduce reliance on fossil fuels, mitigating energy shortages and promote environmental sustainability, while concurrently creating jobs in the renewable energy sector. We are prioritizing addressing barriers to education, particularly for marginalized groups like persons with disabilities, to cultivate a more educated and skilled workforce, thereby enhancing economic growth. Zimbabwe is promoting gender-sensitive policies and infrastructure improvements to empower women and girls, fostering their increased participation in economic, social, and political spheres, and contributing to more inclusive development. Our foreign policy is anchored on the mantra, Zimbabwe is a friend to all and an enemy to none, and we continue to leverage diplomatic engagement in international partnerships to mitigate the impact of economic sanctions, fostering trade, investment, and technical cooperation that strengthen economic resilience. Investing in disaster management capabilities and enforcing environmental laws is critical for safeguarding ecosystems and public health, particularly in the face of natural disasters and climate change impacts. By seizing these opportunities through strategic investments, policy reforms, and international collaboration, Zimbabwe can navigate its challenges and chart a path towards a more prosperous, sustainable future. These efforts are crucial not only for immediate improvements, but also for achieving sustainable development goals that benefit the nation comprehensively. Allow me to end by making an additional statement that as we are gathered in this room as Africa, we may need also to come up with a comprehensive action plan so that as we move forward, let's take action against what we would have agreed upon, because we really need that to aid on action-oriented strategies. I submit and over.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We have a few more interventions to get through, and I would ask the remaining speakers, I'm sorry that I have to be very, very strict, and if we could remain for 2 minutes if possible. I'd like to go to Mr. John Gilroy, who will be representing His Excellency Mr. Ossian Smith, the Minister of State at the Department of Public Expenditure, National Development Plan Delivery and Reform at the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications from the Republic of Ireland, who was with us, but unfortunately had to leave for another event. But Mr. Gilroy will kindly deliver some brief remarks on his behalf. And if the remarks are a bit longer, please share them with us to be circulated. But if you could summarize in 2 minutes, that would be ideal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ministers, Special Advisor, Ambassadors. John Paul, thank you for inviting Ireland here today. As you say, I was joined by Ireland's Minister of State for Public Expenditure. Regretfully, he had to depart before he had the opportunity to speak, but he did have the opportunity to listen, which is in many ways more important at events such as this. And I'll say a few words in the Minister's stead. First, strengthening governance and supporting democracy is at the heart of Ireland's foreign policy and development cooperation to accelerate SDG implementation, including SDG 16 on peace, justice and strong institutions, and SDG 17 on revitalising the global partnership for sustainable development. Effective and accountable institutions, underpinned by strong governance and adherence to rule of law, are central to the realisation of human rights. Ireland deeply appreciates the role that the UN and AU partnership is playing with regard to economic development, as well as peace and security on the continent of Africa, against a challenging global and regional backdrop and institutional reform processes. But building strong institutions for a prosperous and resilient Africa, as we heard today, is not just about capacity building and donor support for governance and DRM initiatives. There are structural flaws and inequalities in our global system which need to be addressed, and momentum is building. Last year's SDGs Summit Political Declaration, co-facilitated by the Irish and Qatari ambassadors, recognised the centrality of financing for development and international financial architecture reform to the entire 2030 agenda. And this September's Summit of the Future can further accelerate this work. And next year's FFD4 conference is a vital opportunity for significant progress. It can be both an endpoint and a new beginning. We must use this conference and its preparatory process to recouple financing for development and the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for setting an excellent example in terms of the timing. And I have the pleasure now to go to Ms. Monica Malit, who is a youth representative with us today, and I think who has a very inspiring story. Monica has journeyed as a young refugee fleeing conflict in South Sudan to become the first international president of the University of Nairobi Students Association, and she has overcome various challenges to be with us and to be where she is today. And she has also founded the Youth Uplift Network and the Gender Inclusive Community, and has garnered recognition for her advocacy, and I think is particularly an advocate for attaining the Sustainable Development Goals and recognizing how to address this in regions of conflict. So Monica, if you could share with us in 2 minutes, what would be your key message for us to accelerate the SDGs and Agenda 2063?
Thank you so much, and it's an honor to be here today. And speaking on the SDGs and the role of youth and the refugees in accelerating the achievement of these goals, my call will be on 3 or 4 important key agendas in youth inclusion. One of them will be youth engagement. And as we know, Africa is a youthful continent, whereby a majority of the population is made up by youth. And by this, we need to prioritize meaningful engagement on policy making, which is by creating platforms that engages youth. And on the same, we need to discuss incorporating youth voices when it comes to how do we achieve the SDGs. On that, I'll also call on the accountability and monitoring of different agencies that implement the SDGs, and this especially to the governments. Can we have youth representative, and by establishing these mechanisms of monitoring the progress on the SDGs, we will have society and communities getting involved, because they are on the level of, they are part and parcel of achieving the SDGs. And then the biggest thing that I want to call upon everyone else today when it comes to youth engagement is capacity building. We don't have, at times, the youth don't have the capacity to engage meaningfully in accelerating the achievement of the goals for SDGs. On the same, we will want to have inclusive policies, and I'll end there because of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica, for this inspiring message. And you've mentioned lots of things, but I would particularly like to highlight how you emphasized accountability and how we measure progress and how we must show that joint determination. I now have 2 other youth speakers, but before we go to them, I would just like to recognize that we have been joined by Minister July Moyo, the Minister for Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare from the Republic of Zimbabwe. Minister, thank you for being with us. Your representative delivered a fantastic statement on your behalf, but I just wanted to mention that you are here so that everyone knows and shows your commitment and support. So thank you so much for being with us. And I'd now like to go to Victor Ochen, who is a peace advocate and leader of young people in Africa. And
Victor a vraiment surmonté beaucoup d'adversités. Il a grandi en Ouganda, mais il a passé 21 ans dans les camps de PDI, de personnes déplacées internes, voilà, camp de réfugiés. Voilà, pendant 21 ans, voilà, il a une expérience assez variée. Voilà, il était engagé dans la campagne contre les enfants soldats. Donc toutes les victimes.
2015 as one of Africa's most influential persons, and so we are very pleased to have him, and also the youngest African Nobel Peace Prize nominee, and we are delighted to have him with us today, also as a UN Goodwill Ambassador and member of the UNHCR Global Advisory Group. So, Victor, we thank you for sharing with us very briefly what your key message is if we are to support people like you who are at the age of 13 face such challenges, and what needs to change that we can make that difference happen?
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. As introduced, what I do believe would be the better way forward, one would be moving away or carrying forward from the theme of the Africa we want to Africa we own. I think for far too long, people have failed to identify, especially the ordinary African citizens. There's a disconnect between the African Union and then the African people. If you can address that gap, it would be a good opportunity, because our young people are happy and they're confessing, they feel the pain in their hearts when they're voting in the European Parliament, and yet they can't do the same for African Union. We need to look into that. Then secondly, the world is celebrating the global transition to clean energy. And as we're doing so, may we not forget, may we never be silent about the cost, the human cost of energy transition, especially in Africa. You know, our cities around the world are becoming clean and quiet, but the noise and cries in the forests of Congo and other places are getting louder. So we need to assess that. Third, it's important that we cultivate on the digital talent in the continent. You know, young Africans are very much involved and they're committed. If we can tap in that opportunity, the potential, we have the opportunity to engage young people in transformation, especially in this digital economy. Fourth, climate change. Everybody has spoken very eloquently about climate change with the big English, big words, carbon credit, transition, and all that. But in the community, they're looking at wetland. Why is it drying? Will pre-planting bring back the wetland? If we cannot answer that question, then we are totally derailed from the reality in the community. Unemployment, migration, those are effects of climate change, and youth are at the center of such, And then the very last, climate change and conflict are globally intertwined, challenges. How we address climate change and conflict will be critical, and also we can't do it in a hurry, because if we try to do so, we'll make a big mistake. But most importantly, may we understand that if we have to move forward, we need to mobilize a generation that is so willing and committed to defy violence in pursuing building Africa we want, and most importantly, Africa we own. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor. The Africa that we own is such a strong message, I think, for us to take forward. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Our final youth speaker is Victoria Nyanjura, who is a survivor, activist, and educator, who is also born in northern Uganda and was abducted by the Lord's Resistance Army at 14 and held captive for 8 years before escaping with 2 children. And she became a key figure in Uganda's transitional justice, earning international accolades. We are very pleased to have her with us today. Also, she's the founder of Women in Action for Women and the head of St. Bakita Vocational Training Center. And she advocates for more skills development and entrepreneurship for women. Thank you so much, Victoria, for being with us. And if you could share in 2 minutes your key message. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here today. I thank everyone who spoke, because I had a lot to talk about, but I'll just summarize in 3 things. One is the love for ourselves. People who love themselves get to love their families. You love the community you live in and the world at large. We are discussing about owning Africa we want. Let us love ourselves and love Africa so we can work around that. Peace is all we need. When peace exists, going to school will be the order of the day. In conflict areas, children fail to go to school, yet we are seeing that the future of Africa tomorrow lies in the ability of us empowering the youth today to safeguard the future tomorrow. So I want to call all of us to action, that let us begin it today. As we head back to our own countries, let us preach the peace we want in Africa. Let us speak the empowerment formally in vocational education, skills development, so that people are empowered. People who have nothing to lose can cause any chaos. But when people eat, when they can go to the hospital, when people can go to school, all will work out well, and the sustainable development goals we are talking about will easily be realized. Decisions will be made at each and every level because people are empowered. Thank you so much. Let us love Africa. Let us work together. You all can make the impact we want. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much to all of the interventions. Unfortunately, we started a little bit late. We are at time. I would propose, if possible, I think we've heard from a very broad range of voices. We've heard from ministers, we've heard from experts, we've heard from people who have led voluntary national review processes, we've heard from young people and civil society, and I think that it would be best that we close now. And also the room, unfortunately, I think some of you may have noticed that the AC I think is we're reaching the end of the day, so it's shutting down. So thank you very much, everyone. We will conclude at this point. Allow me to just make a few comments on some key points that perhaps can emerge from our discussions. Firstly, I think we heard very, very strongly, and actually both from governments as well as from young people and from ministers, this point about ownership. How Africa needs to own its own processes to be able to move forward. Africa does need support to reach that level, to reach that point at which it can mobilize its own resources. But the fundamental aspect is being able to invest ourselves in the vision that we want, the Africa that we want, which I think, as our USG has always repeated, the Africa we want is the Africa the world needs. Because if Africa succeeds, it will actually be, will have a multiplier effect globally in terms of really achieving the goals of the Summit for the Future, the Sustainable Development Goals, and Agenda 2063. To achieve this, we also need to advocate for change at the global level in terms of the international financing architecture and re-looking completely at multilateralism so that it really delivers in terms of development, because development is the fastest vaccine for peace. And by delivering the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063, we will be also ensuring the accountability towards future generations in terms of delivering the necessary levels of development that our populations expect. So with those few summarizing words, I would like to close our session. I would like to warmly thank Your Excellencies, the ministers, who have made excellent interventions, the ministers who have spoken from the floor, the heads of delegation, the representatives of youth and civil society, as well as the co-conveners, which include the African Union Commission, the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa of the United Nations, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the United Nations Development Programme, as well as EDEP, which is the capacity building arm of the ECA. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Je vous souhaite très bonne soirée.